They say humans are the only species in the galaxy that keeps pets instead of livestock. The Galactic Council found this amusing right up until they discovered what happens when you hurt one. The Zephyrians had ruled the Outer Rim for 3,000 years. Their technology was superior, their military unmatched, their cruelty legendary. They had crushed rebellions, enslaved entire worlds, and committed genocides that made the history books weep. But they had never met humanity. When Earth's first colony ship, the New Horizon, drifted into Zephyrian space carrying 10,000 sleeping colonists and their precious cargo bay full of Earth animals, the aliens saw nothing more than resources to exploit. The colonists would make excellent slaves. The animals? Exotic delicacies for their tables. They made one critical error in judgment. Among those animals was a small golden retriever named Buddy, companion to 8-year-old Sarah Chen. When Sarah's screams echoed through the colony ship as Zephyrian soldiers dragged her family away, Buddy tried to protect her. The brave little dog managed exactly 3 barks before a Zephyrian boot crushed his spine. Sarah watched her best friend die in her arms as the aliens laughed. That was their first mistake. Their second was letting her live to tell about it. The third mistake? They underestimated what humans are capable of when you touch the things they love. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength isn't their technology, their adaptability, or their warfare. It's their memory. And their capacity for love-driven vengeance that knows no bounds, accepts no compromises, and never, ever forgives. The Zephyrians thought they were predators. They were about to discover they had just become prey. Commander Elena Vasquez stared at the wreckage floating in space where the colony ship New Horizon should have been. 3 months. 3 months since they'd lost contact with 10,000 souls, and this twisted metal graveyard was all that remained. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres called from the communications station, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "We're getting a signal from one of the escape pods." Elena's heart jumped. Survivors. After 3 months in the void, actual survivors. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a small figure huddled in the cramped confines of an emergency pod. A child, no more than 8 years old, with dark hair matted to her skull and eyes that had seen too much. "This is Sarah Chen," the girl's voice was steady despite everything. "Survivor of colony ship New Horizon. If anyone receives this message, you need to know what happened to us. You need to know what they did." Elena leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the command console. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Sarah's image wavered as the pod's power systems struggled to maintain the transmission. "The Zephyrians came 3 months ago. They said we were trespassing in their space. They said we belonged to them now." The child's voice cracked, but she pressed on. "They took everyone to their planet. Made them work in the mines. The old people, the sick ones, they didn't need them." Elena closed her eyes, knowing what was coming next. "They killed the animals first," Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face. "Said they were going to eat them. My dog Buddy, he tried to protect me when they came for my parents. He was so small, but he was brave. They laughed when they crushed him. They laughed while I held him as he died." The bridge crew exchanged dark glances. Every person present had grown up with pets, had loved an animal that loved them back unconditionally. The thought of anyone harming such creatures for sport sent a cold rage through their veins. "I hid in the ventilation shafts," Sarah went on. "Lived on emergency rations and recycled water for weeks while they stripped the ship. I saw them load my friends into cargo containers. I heard my mother screaming my name until her voice gave out. When they finally left, I got to this pod and sent out a distress beacon." The transmission flickered again, the pod's systems failing after months of operation on minimal power. "If anyone finds this, please don't let them get away with it. They said humans were weak. They said we'd make good slaves because we're soft and emotional. They said our love for animals and each other made us pathetic." Sarah's young face hardened with a resolve that seemed impossible for someone her age. "They were wrong about one thing. Our love doesn't make us weak. It makes us dangerous. The transmission cut out as the pod's power finally died. Elena stood in the oppressive silence that followed. Around her, 30 seasoned military personnel struggled to process what they'd witnessed. These weren't just random pirates or raiders. The Zephyrians were an established galactic power, recognized by the Galactic Council, with territory spanning dozens of star systems. "Orders, Commander?" Lieutenant Torres asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena turned to face her crew. These men and women had served with her through border skirmishes and peacekeeping missions. They'd seen combat, death, and the ugly realities of interstellar politics. But none of them had ever encountered something like this. "We recover that pod first," she said, her voice carrying across the bridge with absolute authority. "Get me everything from its databanks. Full sensor logs, life support readings, anything that can tell us exactly what happened here." "Yes, ma'am," Torres replied, already coordinating with the recovery teams. Elena moved to the tactical display, studying the debris field with new eyes. Now she could see the pattern. The way the ship had been systematically dismantled rather than destroyed. The Zephyrians hadn't wanted to eliminate evidence of human presence, they'd wanted to harvest everything useful and leave the rest as a warning to anyone who might follow. "Commander," Chief Petty Officer Martinez spoke up from the sensor station. "I'm picking up trace elements consistent with Zephyrian fusion drives. The trail is old, but I can extrapolate a course." "Where does it lead?" "The Kepler 442 system. That's deep in Zephyrian territory." Elena nodded grimly. The Kepler 442 system was home to 3 Zephyrian mining worlds and served as a regional hub for their slave operations. If the survivors had been taken anywhere, it would be there. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Hayes from the intelligence station interrupted. "You should see this. I've been cross-referencing the attack with our databases on Zephyrian operations. This wasn't random." Elena walked over to Hayes Station, where multiple screens displayed tactical assessments and intelligence reports. "The Zephyrians have been expanding aggressively for the past 5 years, Hayes explained, highlighting various star charts. They've hit 12 different species colony efforts. Always the same pattern: capture the colonists for slave labor, take anything valuable, leave the elderly and infirm to die. But this is the first time they've targeted a human colony. Why us? Why now? According to these reports, they've been testing our responses. Small raids on merchant vessels, attacks on unmanned research stations. They wanted to see how we'd react to provocations." Hayes pulled up another file. "Commander, I think the New Horizon was deliberately chosen as a target. It was carrying families, children, pets. They wanted to send a message about human weakness." Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This wasn't just about territory or resources. The Zephyrians had made this personal. "What's our current force status?" she asked her executive officer, Commander James Park. "We've got the Retribution and her escort squadron. 6 frigates, 2 destroyers, and a light cruiser. Total complement of 800 personnel." Park paused, studying Elena's expression. "Commander, even if we could reach Kepler 442 without triggering a diplomatic incident, we'd be facing an entire star system's worth of Zephyrian forces. The odds would be suicide." Elena walked back to the main display, where Sarah's image was frozen in the final moments of her transmission. 8 years old, alone in space for 3 months, and still fighting to ensure her family's sacrifice meant something. "Patch me through to Fleet Command," Elena ordered. "Priority 1 encryption." "Commander," Park stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If we report this through official channels, it'll get tied up in bureaucracy for months. The Galactic Council will want to investigate, hold hearings, negotiate. By the time we get authorization to act, those colonists will be worked to death in Zephyrian mines." Elena met her ex's eyes, seeing her own thoughts reflected there. Park had served with her for 6 years. He knew her well enough to understand what she was thinking. "Are you suggesting we go rogue, Commander?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes doing the right thing and doing the legal thing aren't the same." Park gestured toward the debris field surrounding them. 10,000 people, Commander. 10,000 human beings taken as slaves, and a little girl's dog killed for sport. How do we live with ourselves if we don't act? Elena considered this carefully. Going outside the chain of command would end her career at best, result in court-martial at worst. But, she thought about Sarah's words, our love doesn't make us weak. It makes us dangerous. Commander Martinez, she called out. How long would it take to modify our sensor arrays for deep space reconnaissance? About 6 hours, ma'am. Why? Because we're going to need to see them before they see us. Elena turned to address her entire bridge crew. I'm going to be very clear about what I'm proposing. We're going to track the Zephyrians to their stronghold. We're going to gather intelligence on their defenses. And then, we're going to make them regret ever hearing the word human. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his station. Commander, the entire crew has been monitoring communications. They've all heard Sarah's message. To a person, they're ready to follow you wherever this leads. Elena nodded slowly. She'd known her crew was solid, but this kind of loyalty in the face of certain career suicide spoke to something deeper than military discipline. Very well. Martinez, begin sensor modifications. Hayes, I want everything you can find on Zephyrian military capabilities, civilian infrastructure, and leadership hierarchy. Torres, send a coded message to Fleet Command reporting our position and status, but hold off on the details of what we found here until I give you the word. Yes, ma'am, came the chorus of replies. As her crew bent to their tasks with grim determination, Elena returned to the tactical display. The Zephyrians had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They'd seen love and compassion as weaknesses to exploit, not understanding that these same qualities could transform ordinary people into something far more dangerous than any professional army. They were about to learn that you don't hurt a human's family and walk away. Not ever. The hunt was about to begin. Admiral Krestak stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching human slaves labor in the mining pits below. 3 months had passed since his forces had claimed the New Horizon, and the investment was already paying dividends. Humans, it turned out, were remarkably efficient workers when properly motivated. The key was understanding their emotional weaknesses. Separate families, but keep them close enough to see each other. Let them know that their loved one's welfare depended on their productivity. It was a system the Zephyrians had perfected over millennia of conquest. Admiral, his aide, Captain Vorth, approached with the day's reports. Production is up 12% from last month. The human female designated Chen continues to be particularly productive. Krestak's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Dr. Lisa Chen had been a xenobiologist aboard the colony ship, and her desperate work ethic to protect her remaining family members had inspired the other human slaves to similar efforts. Fear was always an excellent motivator, but hope was even better. And the security situation? Stable, sir. We've had no escape attempts since the first week. The humans seem to have accepted their circumstances. Krestak nodded, though something nagged at him. In his 3 centuries of military service, he'd conquered dozens of species, and there was usually more resistance. Humans had fought viciously during the initial capture, but since arriving at Kepler 442b, they'd been almost docile. Sir, another officer interrupted from the communications station. We're receiving long-range sensor data from our perimeter scouts. There's a small human military squadron conducting what appears to be routine patrol operations about 30 light-years from our position. How small? 8 vessels total. Frigate-class escorts and support ships. Nothing that poses a threat to our installations. Krestak dismissed the information with a wave. Human military technology was decades behind Zephyrian standards. Their weapons couldn't penetrate modern shielding, and their ships lacked the speed for effective hit-and-run tactics. It was precisely this technological inferiority that had made humans such attractive targets for slave raids. What the Admiral didn't know was that the routine patrol had been anything but routine. 30 light-years away, Commander Elena Vasquez studied the holographic display of the Kepler 442 system with predatory intensity. For 2 weeks, her squadron had conducted deep reconnaissance missions, mapping Zephyrian defenses, identifying key installations, and, most importantly, locating the human prisoners. Confirmed, Commander, Lieutenant Hayes reported from the intelligence station. We've identified 3 separate mining facilities on 442b, all with significant human populations. The main compound houses approximately 8,000 individuals. 2 smaller facilities have roughly 1,000 each. Elena absorbed this information grimly. If their reconnaissance was accurate, they'd found all 10,000 colonists from the New Horizon. The question now was how to extract them from the heart of Zephyrian space without getting them all killed in the process. What about their defensive capabilities? She asked. Commander Park pulled up tactical displays showing the system's layout. 12 orbital defense platforms, each equipped with heavy plasma cannons. A permanent fleet presence of at least 25 warships, including 3 battlecruisers. Ground installations protected by energy shields and automated defense systems. In other words, a fortress, Elena murmured. Yes, ma'am. Any direct assault would be suicide, even with a full fleet backing us up. Elena walked to the forward viewport, staring out at the distant stars where 10,000 human beings were being worked to death. The rational part of her mind understood the impossibility of the situation. 8 ships against an entire star system's defenses. Her crew would die, the hostages would die, and the Zephyrians would continue their expansion unchecked. But rationality had died the moment she'd watched 8-year-old Sarah Chen describe her dog's murder. Hayes, show me everything we know about Zephyrian psychology and social structure. The intelligence officer compiled his research on the main display. They're a rigid hierarchical society. Military command structure is absolute, subordinates never question superior officers. Their entire culture is built around the concept of dominance through strength. What about their civilians? Completely dependent on the military caste for protection. They've never developed independent defense capabilities because they've never needed them. The military handles all external threats. Elena studied the data carefully. The Zephyrians had conquered through overwhelming force for so long that they'd never developed strategies for asymmetrical warfare. They couldn't conceive of an enemy that might use unconventional tactics. Commander, Chief Martinez interrupted from the engineering station. I've been working on those sensor modifications you requested. I think I've found something interesting. Elena moved to Martinez's station, where complex technical diagrams filled multiple screens. The Zephyrians use a centralized communication network for all military and civilian coordination, Martinez explained. Everything runs through relay satellites positioned throughout the system. Take out the right satellites in sequence, and you can isolate their ground forces from Fleet Command. How long would that isolation last? With their backup systems? Maybe 6 hours before they re-establish communications. But, during those 6 hours, their ground commanders would be operating blind. Elena felt the first glimmer of a plan forming in her mind. What about their civilian infrastructure? Completely automated and vulnerable. Power generation, water processing, atmospheric systems, all controlled by centralized computer networks. Networks that, with the right approach, could be accessed remotely. Elena looked at her senior staff, seeing understanding dawn in their eyes. They couldn't win a conventional battle against the Zephyrians, but they didn't need to. They just needed to make the cost of holding human slaves higher than the value those slaves provided. Hayes, I want detailed profiles on every Zephyrian commander in the system. Find me their families, their homes, their personal interests. Martinez, begin preparation for simultaneous cyber warfare operations against their infrastructure networks. Torres, draft a message to be broadcast on all Zephyrian civilian frequencies. What kind of message, Commander? Torres asked. Elena's expression hardened. The kind that explains exactly what happens when you hurt human families. Over the next 48 hours, Elena's squadron moved into position with the precision of a surgical instrument. Each ship had a specific target, each crew member a carefully defined role in what was about to become the most comprehensive psychological warfare campaign in human military history. The attack began not with weapons fire, but with information. At precisely 0300 local time on Kepler 442b, every civilian communication network in the system came alive with the same transmission. Admiral Kresthak was pulled from sleep by his aide's urgent summons to the command center. "What's happening?" he demanded, still groggy. "Sir, someone has hijacked our civilian broadcast networks. The message is disturbing." On the main display, a human woman in military uniform looked directly into the camera with eyes like winter storms. "I am Commander Elena Vasquez of the Earth Defense Force," the figure said with absolute calm. 3 months ago, your forces attacked and enslaved 10,000 human colonists, including children and their animal companions. You killed those animals for sport and forced those children to watch. Kresthak's blood went cold. Somehow, the humans had not only learned of the New Horizon raid but had tracked his forces to their most secure installation. "You made 2 critical errors," the human continued. "First, you assumed that because we love our families and our pets, we would be easy to intimidate. Second, you assumed that our emotional bonds made us weak rather than dangerous." The transmission shifted to show detailed intelligence reports, blueprints of Zephyrian military installations, personal information about officers and their families, tactical assessments that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. "We know where you live," Elena's voice continued with terrifying calm. "We know where your children go to school. We know which restaurants you frequent, which entertainment districts you visit, which medical facilities treat your families. We have spent weeks learning everything about you." Around the command center, Zephyrian officers exchanged nervous glances. This level of intelligence gathering represented capabilities far beyond what they'd attributed to human technology. "You have 48 hours to release our people and return them safely to neutral territory," Elena concluded. "If you refuse, you will discover that humans are not the harmless creatures you believed us to be. We don't make war the way you do. We don't fight for territory or resources. When you threaten our families, we fight to make you regret the day you were born." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. "Sir," Captain Vorth spoke carefully. "Surely this is a bluff. 8 ships cannot threaten an entire star system." Kresthak wasn't sure. Something in the human female's eyes suggested that traditional military logic might not apply to this situation. But he was a Zephyrian admiral with 3 centuries of conquest behind him. He would not be intimidated by emotional mammals. "Maintain current operations," he ordered. "Double security around all installations. If the humans want a fight, they'll get one." That was his first mistake. His second was believing that humans would fight by Zephyrian rules. 12 hours later, the lights went out across the entire Kepler 442 system. The first power grid failure hit Kepler 442b at 0347 local time. Within minutes, the planet's 3 major cities were plunged into darkness as automated systems crashed in cascading waves of technological collapse. Emergency lighting flickered on in critical facilities, casting eerie shadows across panicked Zephyrian faces. Admiral Kresthak stood in his command center, now running on backup power, and watched his carefully ordered world dissolve into chaos. Status reports flooded in from across the system: water treatment plants offline, atmospheric processors shutting down, transportation networks dead, communication relays severed. "How is this possible?" he demanded, his voice echoing with barely contained fury. "Our networks are hardened against electronic warfare. No species has ever successfully penetrated our systems." Chief Technical Officer Varlath worked frantically at his console, streams of code scrolling across multiple displays. "Sir, this isn't standard cyber warfare. They're not trying to break our encryption or overwhelm our firewalls. They're using our own automated systems against us." "Explain." Every Zephyrian facility runs on standardized computer protocols developed over the past millennium. The humans somehow obtained our base operating codes and are sending perfectly legitimate shutdown commands through our own networks. To our computers, these commands appear to be coming from authorized sources. Kresthak stared at the technical readouts, his tactical mind struggling to comprehend the implications. You're saying they've learned our languages, studied our technology, and infiltrated our most secure systems in a matter of weeks? Not just learned, sir. They've improvised. Some of these attack vectors are using system vulnerabilities that we didn't know existed. They're thinking about our technology in ways that never occurred to us. Across the system, the human assault continued with methodical precision. Commander Elena Vesquez coordinated the operation from her flagship's bridge, watching as 2 weeks of careful preparation paid devastating dividends. Water processing plants are down across all 3 worlds, Lieutenant Torres reported. Emergency reserves will last approximately 72 hours before civilian populations begin experiencing shortages. Atmospheric systems? Operating on emergency protocols only. No immediate threat to life support, but comfort levels will degrade rapidly. Elena nodded, checking the chronometer. They were 18 hours into their 48-hour ultimatum, and Phase 1 was proceeding exactly as planned. The Zephyrians were learning that technological superiority meant nothing when your enemies understood your weaknesses better than you did. Commander Park, status on the fleet isolation? Communications between ground installations and orbital forces remain severed. Admiral Kresthak's ships can see that something's wrong planetside, but they can't coordinate response efforts. Elena studied the tactical display showing Zephyrian fleet positions. 25 warships hung in orbit above the mining colonies, their commanders undoubtedly frustrated by their inability to engage an enemy they couldn't locate or communicate with. Martinez, begin Phase 2. Chief Martinez grinned as he activated the next stage of their operation. Yes, ma'am. Initiating targeted infrastructure failures. On Kepler 442b, the mining facility holding Dr. Lisa Chen and 8,000 other human prisoners began experiencing cascading system malfunctions. Automated security systems switched between lockdown and evacuation protocols. Environmental controls fluctuated wildly. Transport mechanisms ground to halt. But the humans noticed something their captors didn't: the failures were following a pattern. Food preparation areas remained functional. Medical facilities maintained full power. Living quarters kept optimal atmospheric conditions. Only systems related to mining operations and prisoner containment were affected. Dr. Chen, working in the geological survey section, recognized the pattern first. She'd been a xenobiologist, trained to observe and analyze complex systems. The infrastructure failures weren't random, they were surgical strikes designed to create maximum disruption with minimal threat to human life. Someone's coming for us, she whispered to her work partner, Dr. James Harrison. This isn't system failure. This is rescue. Word spread quietly through the human population. After 3 months of despair, hope began to kindle in 10,000 hearts. Admiral Kresthak was discovering that hope among prisoners was infinitely more dangerous than conventional weapons. Sir, Captain Vorth reported with obvious distress. We're losing control of the mining operations. The humans aren't exactly rioting, but they're becoming uncooperative. What do you mean, uncooperative? Work productivity has dropped to near zero. They're claiming that system malfunctions make their tasks impossible to complete safely. Our overseers can't distinguish between legitimate safety concerns and deliberate sabotage. Kresthak moved to the observation windows overlooking the main mining facility. Below, he could see human prisoners moving with purpose that hadn't been there yesterday. They weren't panicking at the infrastructure failures, they were adapting, organizing, preparing. Sir, another aide interrupted. We're receiving reports from civilian authorities across the system. Citizens are demanding explanations for the power failures, water shortages, and communication breakdowns. There are rumors that humans are responsible, and panic is beginning to spread. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kresthak felt truly outmaneuvered. The humans weren't fighting his military forces, they were fighting his entire civilization's way of life. Every automated convenience, every technological comfort that Zephyrian society had come to depend on was being systematically stripped away. "Get me a secure channel to the human ships," he ordered. "Sir, communications are still severely limited, but I believe I can establish contact." Minutes later, a holographic display activated, showing Commander Elena Vasquez on the bridge of her ship. She looked exactly as she had in the broadcast message, calm, professional, and utterly implacable. "Admiral Kresthak," Elena said without preamble. "I assume you're ready to discuss the terms of our people's release." "You're making a grave error, human," Kresthak replied, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of conquest. "This star system is under Zephyrian sovereignty. Your actions constitute acts of war against a superior power." Elena's expression didn't change. "Admiral, you seem to be operating under several misconceptions. First, that we care about Galactic Council politics when our families are involved. Second, that your technological superiority matters when we can turn your own systems against you. Third, that we have any intention of following conventional rules of warfare. You cannot possibly sustain this level of system disruption indefinitely." "You're right," Elena agreed. "We can't. But we don't need to. Your own civilian population will demand action long before our capabilities are exhausted. How long before your citizens begin questioning why their military cannot protect them from 8 human ships?" Kresthak felt his mandibles click involuntarily. The human was correct. Already, civilian authorities were demanding explanations he couldn't provide. The Zephyrian military's reputation for invincibility was crumbling with every hour the infrastructure failures continued. "What are your terms?" he asked reluctantly. "Complete release of all human prisoners to neutral territory. Full medical support during transport. Written guarantee that Zephyrian forces will not target human colonies in the future." Elena paused. "And one additional requirement." "Which is?" "A formal apology to Sarah Chen for the murder of her dog." Kresthak stared at the human commander in disbelief. "You would risk interstellar war over the death of an animal?" Elena's eyes hardened to points of ice. "Admiral, you clearly don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans don't see pets as property or resources. They're family members. When you killed that little girl's dog, you committed murder in our eyes. The fact that you can't comprehend this is exactly why you're going to lose this war." "This is not a war. This is a minor diplomatic incident being blown out of proportion by emotional mammals." "Admiral," Elena said with terrifying calm, "you have 29 hours remaining. If our people are not released by then, we will demonstrate exactly how creative humans can be when their families are threatened. Your current infrastructure problems will seem like minor inconveniences compared to what comes next." The transmission ended, leaving Kresthak alone with his doubts and a growing realization that he might have gravely underestimated his opponents. 24 hours later, those doubts became certainty. Elena's final phase began at dawn across the Kepler 442 system. Every automated defense platform, every orbital facility, every computerized system that the Zephyrians had trusted for millennia suddenly began following new protocols. But these weren't destruction protocols. They were something far more psychologically devastating: humiliation protocols. Every public display screen in the system began broadcasting the personal histories of Zephyrian officers involved in the New Horizon attack. Family photographs, private communications, personal fears and failures were shared with entire populations. Military heroes were revealed as petty tyrants. Respected leaders became objects of public ridicule. Civilian transportation systems began playing recordings of human prisoners' final messages to their families. The testimony of 8-year-old Sarah Chen was broadcast in shopping centers, schools, and government buildings. Every Zephyrian citizen heard her describe watching her dog die while their soldiers laughed. Most devastating of all, the humans had somehow obtained recordings of Zephyrian officers discussing their plans for the human prisoners, including casual remarks about which humans would make good breeding stock and speculation about whether human children would make effective servants. Within hours, Zephyrian public opinion began to shift. Citizens who had never questioned military authority started asking uncomfortable questions. Parents imagined their own children in human mining camps. Pet owners, and, yes, even Zephyrians kept companion animals, thought about watching their beloved creatures die for someone else's amusement. Admiral Kresthak watched his society tear itself apart in real time. Civilian protests erupted in major cities. Military families received death threats from their own people. Government officials faced angry crowds demanding to know why their tax resources were being used to operate slave camps. "Sir," Captain Vorth approached with resignation written across his features. "Civilian Authority Council is demanding immediate cessation of prisoner operations. They're threatening to revoke military funding if the situation isn't resolved within 12 hours. Kresthak stared out at his fleet, knowing that military superiority meant nothing when your own people turned against you. The humans hadn't just defeated his forces, they'd made continuing the conflict politically impossible. "Open a channel to the human commander," he ordered quietly. Elena appeared on the display, and Kresthak was struck by how utterly she had destroyed him without firing a single shot. "We accept your terms," he said simply. 6 hours later, transport ships carrying 10,000 human colonists departed Zephyrian space under Elena's escort. In the lead transport, 8-year-old Sarah Chen held a small wooden box containing her dog's ashes, returned to her as part of the formal apology Admiral Kresthak had been forced to deliver personally. As her squadron jumped to hyperspace with their rescued people, Elena reflected on the lesson they'd taught the galaxy. Humans might be emotional creatures who kept pets and loved their families with overwhelming intensity. But that same capacity for love, when threatened, could transform ordinary people into the most dangerous force in the universe. The Zephyrians had learned too late that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their unwillingness to accept that anyone, anywhere, had the right to hurt the things they loved. Behind them, the Kepler 442 system began the long process of rebuilding both their infrastructure and their shattered assumptions about human nature. They would not make the mistake of targeting human colonies again. Word of the rescue spread throughout human space, and, with it, a simple message that every species in the galaxy would come to understand, touch a human's family, and discover what true relentlessness looks like. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity's love. And that was exactly how humans wanted it.